there is a group of animals that survive catastrophes capable of erasing entire continents from the history of life. When I look at a modern crocodile, I see a creature that seems to belong to another world, a silent survivor that challenges everything we think we know about adaptation. And there is one question that has followed me since the beginning of this investigation. How did a reptile manage to survive the extreme cold of the Ice Age? Crocodiles rely on external heat to regulate their vital functions. Their bodies do not generate thermal energy in the same way that mammals and birds do. In theory, they should have been among the first animals to suffer when temperatures began to plummet. And yet, they remained. The more we study this mystery, the stranger it becomes. The Ice Age was one of the harshest periods in Earth's recent history. Entire regions were covered by miles of ice. Ecosystems vanished. Numerous giant species were pushed toward extinction. In a world like that, the existence of crocodiles seems almost like a mistake of nature, a piece that does not fit the puzzle. To understand this contradiction, we need to travel back tens of thousands of years to a world that would be almost unrecognizable to us. A planet where climate shaped every detail of the landscape in a relentless and brutal way. During the last glacial maximum, cold conditions dominated vast portions of the planet. Average temperatures were significantly lower than they are today. In many regions, ice advanced slowly but relentlessly, covering mountains, forests, and plains. The consequences for wildlife were profound. Animals had to migrate, alter their behavior, or face extinction. Many specialized species simply could not keep pace with the speed of environmental change. The balance of ecosystems was constantly tested. Every season brought new challenges for survival. In this setting, crocodiles seem completely out of place. When we think of crocodiles, we imagine tropical rivers, warm mangrove swamps, and sunlit riverbanks. It is difficult to associate these animals with a world shaped by advancing ice sheets. The image simply does not fit, and perhaps that is exactly why this story is so fascinating. While many powerful creatures disappeared, these reptiles found ways to persist in a world that seemed increasingly unsuitable for them. The big question is how they did it. How did a heat-dependent animal survive one of the coldest periods in history? Where were crocodiles when glaciers advanced across the landscape? What strategies allowed them to survive while so many other species vanished forever? You may be surprised by the answers. And before we meet giants that appeared indestructible, perfectly adapted to the cold, yet still disappeared, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every week we will release new videos, and you will be among the first to know whenever a new episode is published. The giants that disappeared. They were enormous, highly specialized animals that seemed prepared to face any challenge. Yet, many of them vanished forever within a relatively short period of natural history. Among the most famous were the mammoths. Their massive bodies were protected by thick layers of fur and fat. For a long time, they appeared perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions of cold environments. But even that was not enough. The saber-toothed cats were also among the top predators of that era. At the same time, giant ground sloths roamed vast areas of the Americas, reaching sizes that seem almost unbelievable today. In other regions, woolly rhinoceroses relied on their strength to survive in hostile environments. What always stands out to me is the contrast between these species and crocodiles. On one side were colossal animals that disappeared. On the other was a group that continued to exist despite the radical changes that transformed the planet. Perhaps the greatest irony is exactly that. Many prehistoric giants appeared invincible when viewed in isolation. However, when the environment changed, traits that had once been advantages became limitations. Survival came to depend on the ability to endure difficult periods while expending as little energy and as few resources as possible. But there is something about crocodilians that cannot be ignored. They have inhabited Earth since long before the dinosaurs and have already survived mass extinction events that occurred millions of years before the Ice Age. The origins of this group trace back to a time long before the appearance of the modern species we know today. Their ancestors inhabited Earth more than 200 million years ago, when the continents looked completely different from how they do now. We are talking about a lineage so ancient that it witnessed the rise of countless animal groups. Crocodilians belong to the same major evolutionary branch that gave rise to dinosaurs and pterosaurs. Although they followed different evolutionary paths over time, they shared distant ancestors that lived in a world dominated by life forms that are now extinct. This means that crocodiles carry within their own bodies characteristics shaped by an extraordinarily deep evolutionary history. Few groups have such a long history. The most remarkable example occurred about 66 million years ago, when one of the most devastating events in Earth's history struck the planet. A colossal impact triggered a chain of environmental changes that led to the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs and countless other species. Even in the face of a catastrophe of that magnitude, crocodilians found ways to endure. This detail is often overlooked when we think about their history. Long before the most recent glaciations, they had already survived a global crisis capable of completely reshaping both terrestrial and marine ecosystems. In other words, by the time the Ice Age arrived, this lineage already carried millions of years of evolutionary experience dealing with periods of instability. The secret weapon: water. While much of the landscape was experiencing severe climatic fluctuations, there was one element capable of softening those changes in a quiet and constant way: water. Few people think about it, but rivers, lakes, and wetlands act as natural temperature regulators. They warm up and cool down much more slowly than the surrounding land. That detail changed everything. During periods of extreme cold, land surfaces could experience dramatic temperature drops within a matter of hours or days. Aquatic environments, however, responded much more gradually. This created relatively stable zones, where conditions remained less extreme than in open areas exposed to the elements. When we compare these two environments, the difference becomes obvious. On land, many animals had to endure freezing winds, food shortages, and constant environmental changes. Near the water, however, there were refuges capable of buffering some of those effects. Perhaps this was one of the crocodile's greatest allies during that period. But water alone does not explain the entire story. There is another characteristic that I find even more impressive. Crocodiles operate with a level of energy efficiency that few modern animals can match. Their bodies function at a pace very different from that of most large vertebrates alive today. A large mammal must constantly consume energy to maintain its bodily functions. Its body works continuously, requiring food at relatively short intervals. The situation for crocodiles is completely different. Their extremely slow metabolism turns every meal into a long-lasting resource. The classic image of a crocodile lying motionless on a riverbank often misleads observers. At first glance, it appears to be passive behavior. In reality, it is a strategy refined over millions of years. Instead of chasing prey over long distances, they remain nearly invisible, conserving energy while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This technique offers enormous advantages during periods of environmental hardship. A predator that actively pursues its prey must constantly spend energy. If the hunt fails, all that effort is wasted. The scarcer the resources become, the greater the risk of that strategy. Crocodiles follow a completely different approach. They remain still, watch, and wait. When an opportunity appears, they launch a fast and extremely efficient attack. In just a few seconds, they can achieve results that other predators might spend many minutes or even hours trying to accomplish. Frozen but not dead. After examining millions of years of environmental change, there is one trait that I consider among the most astonishing parts of this story. When temperatures drop dramatically, some crocodilians can enter a state known as brumation. This biological response allows them to survive unfavorable periods while consuming as few resources as possible. During this process, bodily functions slow down in remarkable ways. Movement decreases, the need for food nearly disappears, and energy consumption reaches extremely low levels. It is almost as if time moves more slowly for them. What is even more fascinating is that this behavior is not confined to the distant past. Even today, researchers observe American alligators enduring harsh winters in certain parts of North America. On some occasions, they remain nearly motionless beneath frozen surfaces, keeping only part of their snouts above the ice so they can breathe. But nature rarely follows human expectations. These modern observations help explain how members of this group were able to survive much harsher climatic phases throughout history. Rather than fighting against environmental conditions, they developed mechanisms that drastically reduced their needs until circumstances became favorable once again. The deeper I go into this investigation, the more I realize that the survival of crocodiles cannot be explained by a single characteristic. It was the combination of many different factors that created one of the most extraordinary success stories in evolution. Entire civilizations rose and fell without ever understanding the true age of this animal group. Long before humans existed, their ancestors were already witnessing landscapes completely different from those of today. Geological changes, climate shifts, and extinction events transformed the planet again and again, yet they remained. Where the Ice Age never won. When we think about the Ice Age, it is common to imagine an entire planet covered in snow, with frozen landscapes stretching as far as the eye can see. For a long time, that was how I pictured this period as well, but the reality was far more complex. Even during the harshest phases of the global climate, there were regions where the cold never managed to take complete control. These areas served as true natural refuges, places where conditions remained relatively favorable for many forms of life to continue existing. And it was there that part of this story continued to unfold. The planet's tropical regions underwent significant changes, but they did not experience the same extreme conditions seen at higher latitudes. Although rainfall patterns, vegetation, and resource availability shifted, many areas still maintained temperatures capable of supporting species that depended on warmer environments. While enormous portions of the northern hemisphere were being squeezed by advancing ice sheets, vast regions near the equator continued to provide much more stable conditions. These locations became true ecological sanctuaries. Forests, river systems, and wetlands spread across parts of South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Oceania served as important strongholds for countless species. Rather than facing the most severe environments, many animals found in these regions an opportunity to survive periods of climatic instability. Crocodilians were among the groups that benefited the most from this geographic distribution. Their presence across multiple continents increased the likelihood that entire populations could find suitable areas in which to continue thriving. They did not depend on a single region of the planet. Instead, they were spread across numerous natural systems capable of providing shelter during critical times. In my opinion, this is one of the most important factors in understanding their long-term survival. The wider a species is distributed, the lower the chances that a single environmental event will wipe out all of its populations at once. Nature often favors organisms capable of occupying different territories and taking advantage of multiple resources. While some creatures were tied to highly specific ecosystems, crocodilians possessed a silent advantage: the ability to exist within a vast network of favorable habitats. This widespread presence functioned almost like a safety system designed by evolution itself. If one population faced difficulties in a particular region, others could continue surviving in more stable locations. That is why I do not like to think of crocodiles merely as survivors. In my view, they represent one of the greatest examples of evolutionary success ever recorded. Their story is not defined by speed, overwhelming strength, or the conquest of new territories. It was built through efficiency, adaptability, and the ability to endure crises that eliminated creatures that appeared far more powerful. When we observe a crocodile resting along a riverbank, we are looking at an animal that carries a legacy almost impossible to comprehend. Every detail of its behavior has been shaped by millions of years of challenges. Every feature of its body is the result of a long sequence of tests imposed by nature itself. Mammoths disappeared. Saber-toothed cats disappeared. Dinosaurs disappeared. But crocodiles are still watching over the world's rivers, just as they were doing millions of years before the first ice age ever began.